First, to require a redwood tree to be planted as a replacement heritage tree for one of the trees that would be removed.
Can we also require irrigation for the redwood, if it is a redwood?
Yes. So the heritage tree ordinance requires that when a heritage tree is replaced, that it's maintained and cared for in a fashion that would facilitate growth to heritage size. So irrigation would be part of that. Would we be? Yeah. So the city arborist would make sure that the irrigation at the building permit stage is sufficient for facilitation of heritage tree maintenance.
And is it also within our power to direct that one or more replacement trees be visible from the Santa Cruz side, placed at the front of the property?
Again, that could go as a condition of approval for consultation with the city arborist at the time of building permit submittal to direct the arborist to recommend the species of tree.
Thanks. My own feelings on the application, I think there's no objections to the architecture. It's already been approved. I haven't heard any neighbors objecting to the house itself. The only objections are the heritage trees, and I think if we could specify replacement redwoods at the front of the property, properly irrigated, I'd be prepared to accept, to vote in favor of the application.
Thank you. Oh, I'll start with the lady to my left, Commissioner Kennedy.
I'm in concurrence with Commissioner Doran, and but for downturn in the economy, the first time the trees would be gone and the house would be built, and so I think that if I would go so far as to make a motion, including some conditions on the types of trees and the care that the trees would receive to get them to heritage size, I would make a motion to approve this project.
I'm sorry, you what do you do?
I do.
You do. So you make a...
I make a motion to approve the project with conditions of specifying the trees that are planted and how they are cared for to encourage their growth to heritage size more rapidly.
And are you looking for a seconder or an amendment to provide further detail on what those trees might be?
Either or both.
Okay. Thank you. So we have a first on the floor with Commissioner Kennedy. Commissioner DeCardi.
Yeah, point of clarification to staff on the irrigation and maintenance of the trees. So the city arborist would check at the point of the building plan and construction to make sure there's irrigation so that you could take care of the trees. There is no enforcement mechanism to make sure that, in fact, they are subsequently watered and taken care of to reach heritage tree size. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think that's mainly something that would be report-based. If it, I don't think that it's ongoing, that the city arborist checks them continuously, but it's, a neighbor may report that there's an issue with the tree, that type of thing.
Yeah, but I don't know if Chair Barnes would concur, but from my service on the Environmental Quality Commission, that sounds absolutely right, that there is no long-term enforcement mechanism other than self-reporting about taking care of trees so that they could eventually reach heritage tree size. Thank you.
Commissioner Kale.
Thank you. So I really appreciate how the house has been moved back 9 feet to save what is now heritage trees number 2021. And I appreciate how number 27 has also been saved. The the removals make sense to me, with the exception of 25. I don't see, it's not clear to me why that has to come out. It seems like there might be a way to work with a more narrow driveway or shifting the driveway to make that work. And as far as planting more redwoods, at least along the frontage, if 25 is a problem as is, I don't see how we're going to squeeze any more redwood trees along the front. Thank you.
Commissioner Riggs.
Yeah, thank you. I concur with a couple of previous comments about the redwood tree, and I'd like to add that along with their rather vigorous growth, that in the case of this lot and the fact that they are redwood trees, I'm inclined to leave the frontage in large part in the hands of the designers who I think are sensitive in general and are being sensitive in this case, and have been responsive to our requests. So I can support, and I'm willing to second the motion to approve with the encouragement to place put the replacement tree as a redwood somewhere in the front of the lot, working with staff. And then I don't want to miss the chance. It's unusual that we have a house for which we make virtually no architectural comments. I think part of that is because it is a very handsome house in this case, and that is probably why we aren't focusing terribly well on it. So I would just like to put that comment forward.
So through the chair, if staff could get clarification on the motion that's been put forward, is it just that one of the replacement trees needs to be redwood and that would need to be further up on the lot, or is it that more than one would be a redwood? Is that just some clarity on that condition of approval would be helpful.
Well, I don't know that, so procedurally speaking, we had a first from Commissioner Kennedy, and Commissioner Kennedy was stating her motion had in it the further discussion about specific tree addition, and then Commissioner Riggs, did you, we don't currently have a second, but Commissioner Riggs, it sounds as though you were adding a recommendation for the first, unless of course you want to be a seconder.
Yes, I did indicate I would like to second.
Okay.
And if the maker agrees, I suggest one of the replacement trees be somewhere in the front and be a redwood. I don't want to try to force crowd this site.
Okay. Okay. We have a first and a second, and the second with the provision by the seconder. Is that acceptable to the maker?
It is.
Okay. So I have a couple thoughts on this property. One, I think the architecture is very well done. I think the layout on the site is well done. I think as you look at the property, the architect has gone to lengths to integrate the garage into the house. So when you're looking from Santa Cruz Avenue, whether it is the veneer, whether it is the arched call them doorways or portico between the garage and the house, the wood doors, and I think the layout is nice. I note that the applicant is not digging into the basement, so we don't have that. So I think it's been a fairly restrained and well thought out, well proportioned, well finished project. So I support it from an architectural standpoint. I do want to talk to some of the screening associated with it. In this project, I don't want to to be lost that the applicant is has a requirement for 3 replacement trees, and they have proposed 8 replacement Brisbane box trees in the rear, and that directly affects our friends on Arbor Road. If anyone is familiar with the Brisbane box, they get tall, they get columnar. They don't have an expressly wide canopy, but they get nice and full. And I think that if you look at the landscaping plan, the addition of those 8 Brisbane box that wrap around the back end, I think will go a very long distance to screening the property. I think more so currently than in a more refined fashion than you currently have. In addition to the removing 10 non-heritage trees and adding approximately 26 new non-heritage trees. So I don't think that this property suffers from a lack of landscaping. Goodness knows we see much sparser landscape plans. We see a reticence to submit any landscape plans. And on this one, we have a landscape plan. We have a robust landscape plan. So I think from a screening perspective, I think the applicant has gone a ways that will have the net result being that the neighbors will not have a decrease in privacy. I think they're going to have an increase. I believe that with the way that the landscaping plan is done. I am not personally in favor of a mandating of a redwood tree in the front of the house. I don't. If anyone lives in front or below a redwood tree, I think there's mixed reviews on what it does to the other parts of your landscaping. So I would not recommend that as being mandated. I think that can be the domain of the landscape architect, because I think the landscape architect has shown that they can plant some trees and do it in a robust fashion. So with that, but I am behind the tail on this. So if the majority of the commission is to require a replanting of a redwood in front, I'll go with that, but I urge my fellow commissioners to contemplate the appropriateness and the benefit of mandating that as opposed to letting the current landscaping plan play itself out. So looking for any additional comments. Commissioner DeCardi.
I suppose since I'm often the tree person, a couple thoughts. In general, I'm inclined to follow Commissioner Kale's comment about the driveway, and I don't understand why the current driveway just can't stay. However, in this instance, the fact that it's been so long that one of the trees has achieved heritage site in the time that the applicant has been before us in doing this work, for me, supersedes that. It just seems unfair. But I still do have that question. I'm not a big fan of dictating where and what kind of trees should be for replacement in this kind of way for a lot of the reasons Commissioner Barnes said. But the one thing that I would say that I think is somewhat problematic, and I appreciate the number of trees and the plantings, is that there is, I think, a difference in creating a community that has a sort of mix of trees of different sizes and scales, including a lot of heritage trees over time, and then replacing with heritage that are actually utilized for a different purpose, like a screening, so that you have a monocrop of trees. And you can imagine that if we followed that with all properties, that we would look somewhat like a tree plantation in our town, as opposed to what we really want and what I think neighbors have moved into the community for. And so I don't really have much to offer about what to do about that, but while I appreciate the planting, what I would say is that if there are 3 heritage trees which are of different sizes and of different type that are scattered in interesting ways on the property that are not particularly helpful or conducive for construction, that replacing them with 8 heritage trees that are on the edge of the property and for screening doesn't seem to me to actually fit the spirit of what we're trying to do. So that's not particularly helpful for a solution, but given everything right now, I would just be inclined to approve it, or to say, do the screening the way that you want to, but you've got these 3 heritage trees that are coming out. Show where there are 3 other trees of different types of interesting places on this property that you propose would be the type of replacement that could conceivably go to heritage trees. So that means they're actually not small, they're not planted underneath something else. You could do something along those lines. But as of right now, I would just approve it.
So we have a first and a second, first from Kennedy, second from Riggs, and the motion has attached to it the condition that a redwood tree be planted, and that redwood tree needs to be in the front yard. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Let me check in with the applicant. If you would mind coming forward. So let's look at your landscaping plan. And do you have a sense of where that redwood would go?
Pretty crowded there already, isn't it? That's the way I kind of look at it, but probably would be the best place is probably close, probably in the south, the northeast corner on the or on the right side of the driveway as you approach the house would be my guess. I don't want to get anywhere near the Valley Oak. I think that's the real heritage tree here, and the redwoods are secondary to that. So, based on the fact that we're moving or taking out tree 25, I think that's the best location for it, assuming that we can fit it in there and that it doesn't disturb the other trees. That would be my location for it, I think.
So tree 25 would come, let me make sure I got my numbers correct.
27 is staying, 27 is staying, 25 is coming out currently. So if we're talking about essentially replacing for 25 or doing a change out there, it probably would be best to locate it over in that quadrant.
And
really, if you look at the front of the property now, and the number of trees that are there, both heritage and non-heritage, and the ones that are being planted, we're running out of room. But that would be the place I'd try and put it.
Right, and just so I understand,
we're trying to put it in the front. Yeah.
Trying to put it in front, and you're contemplating put it in the northeast corner, which would be just a little bit project north of where 25 is currently. Is that correct?
Right, somewhere in the adjacency of 27, I guess, in that triangular or trapezoidal area to the right of the driveway as you approach the house.
Okay. And so that there are no surprises for my fellow commissioners, I'm going to look to the maker and see if that's acceptable. Generally speaking? Okay. We got a deal. All right, so all in favor of the motion as per the staff report and as amended, first by Kennedy, second by Riggs, please raise your hand. Let the records show that it's Commissioners Tate, Doran, Riggs, Barnes, Kennedy, DeCardi, all voting yes. All commissioners voting no. Commissioner Kale, and all commissioners abstaining, none. Okay, so the motion passes. Congratulations. Thank you. Which brings us to the second and last item on tonight's calendar. This is F2, and this is Development Agreement Annual Review. This is 105 to 155 Constitution Drive and 100 to 200 Independence Drive. This is the Menlo Gateway Project. I'm sorry, this is the second of three, excuse me. Menlo Gateway Project. Annual review of the property owner's good faith compliance with the terms of the development agreement for Menlo Gateway, otherwise known as the Bohannon Hotel and Office Project. Good evening, Mr. Smith.
Good evening, Planning Commissioners. I do have one update to the staff report that I wanted to clarify, and that is on page 4 of the staff report. There's a listing of bullets that specify what continues on for terms beyond the end of the development agreement, and there's 4 bullet points. The last one refers to a climate smart action program, which PG&E discontinued, and it mentions that the project is currently enrolled in the Peninsula Clean Energy Eco Plus program. It's actually, they're enrolled in Eco 100, which is 100% greenhouse gas free, and that's correctly stated in attachment D as Eco 100, so I just wanted to make that clarification.
Great, thank you. Any clarifying questions for Mr. Smith? Mr. DeCardi.
This may be for you or for the owner. On D4, it says in the notes around the TOT amount that there was some confusion regarding implementation of the additional 1% TOT rate for the period of time after the hotel opened. I wondered if you could give some more light about what that confusion was and how it was resolved.
Yes, so the rights for the hotel, or the requirements to pay the TOT were assigned to the hotel, and the owner, David Bohannon, assigned those rights when the hotel property took over. And there was some confusion between the various levels of our finance department, and then on their side with the transfer from one team, from Bohannon's team to the hotel team, there was a confusion about the rate of TOT that was to be paid, and they were actually paying the standard rate instead for a period of time. And so we are currently resolving that, hoping to have that wrapped up in February. The amount of that is approximately $280,000.
Through the chair, just follow up. And having that resolved, the idea is that going backwards and forwards, that additional 1% will be recovered to the city.
Right. So as soon as the error was recognized, they began paying the correct rate, and then this $280,000 will be reimbursed to the city for the previous time that it was not caught.
Thank you.
And Mr. Smith, to be clear, will we hear from the applicant in normal order and call for public comment, and then we'll have the opportunity to query the applicant?
That's correct. The applicant has a presentation ready to prepare, and then you can move to public comment after that if you wish.
Thank you. Great. Any other questions? Commissioner Riggs.
Yes, thank you. Through the chair, for Mr. Smith. On page 5, I think it is, you indicate that, in the middle of page 5, that the applicant meets with city staff weekly. Is that an ongoing situation?
Yeah, we have been meeting on Thursdays since 2015.
I'm just curious, is there any interest in the applicant's part or the city's in relieving them of some of that burden, maybe once a month? I'm just curious if you have that much to talk about.
It has slowed down as the project has slowly wound down. We don't meet necessarily every single week now, but it's been bi-weekly. It's been narrowing down, but they are paying for the time that they do meet with staff.
All right, very well. Thank you.
Commissioner Kale.
Thank you. I had a similar shock about that. So I'm just curious, who attends the weekly meetings? Is it one person from the city and one person from the Bohannon organization?
No, we have, typically it's engineering division and the planning division, and then there will be 3 to 4 representatives from their team depending on outstanding questions. Because it's such a large project, there has been a lot of coordination on items large and small, and so we found that this is one of the best ways to make sure that we are up to speed with everything that's going on.
Thank you. And last question is, did I see that this is the final annual review? This will be the last time we're going to see this?
Right. So the development agreement specifies that when the core and shell of the second Constitution office building is finalized, which it was towards the end of last year, the development agreement, the term of that agreement then expires. But as we noted, there are some ongoing conditions that will survive either indefinitely or as defined in the development agreement.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no other lights on, I will proceed to say good evening to the applicant, and the mic is yours.
Hi, I'm Steve Buckholz with Heller Manus Architects, and I've been the architect on the project for the last 5 years and attending those weekly meetings with the city staff. So this project, what I'm showing you now, is the phase 1 part of the project, the completed project, and obviously the professional photographs of that project. This is the office building, and in the distance you have the fitness center and then the hotel. This is a view of the fitness center and the parking structure on the first phase. This is a view of the plaza of the first phase office building. This is a view between the office building and the parking structure, highlighting the art wall, which is the dichroic glass and metal screening. And then this is a blow-up of the dichroic glass when it's activated by the sun. And if the commissioners have not been to the project in the daytime, when this art wall glass is activated, it is a spectacular time, and it changes as you look at it at different times of the year, different times of the day. So this, again, this image picks up one of the more activated times, but just to state that I think it came off spectacular. This is a view of the fitness center looking back toward the first office building. And this is a view out of the terrace of the first office building. So that was just, again, these are our finished professional photographs. The phase 2, that though it's completed, it's still got the TI under construction, and so the photographs won't be quite the same quality. Now I'm going to go through some of the offsites. One of the offsite connections was called the Arc of Independence, which connects phase 1 and phase 2, and it required sidewalk improvements, landscaping, and fence edges and lighting. Another improvement of the project was the T intersection. It used to be a hook, which was an unsafe condition. And also, there was a piece of city property that we termed the pocket park that is adjacent to the parking structure and has now been planted, and there's pathways in that area. And those are both complete at this point. Here's a view of phase 2 with the 2 parking structures as well as the 2 office buildings. This is office building number 2. This is the central plaza between the office buildings with the bridge element and the view to Bedwell Bayfront Park. Office building 3. This is a view of the frontage, which is the landscape planting sidewalk in front of the buildings on Constitution. Another view of that. This was another improvement on Chrysler. It was adding a lane and also signalization and landscaping. And then we did some improvements at Bellhaven. They included the before, which was, this is the condition with the fence and the street. And we were able to add a new fence, improve the landscaping and the overall character. We also had a small improvement at Beechwood School where they had no pathway. This was the before. There was no walkway, and we provided a walkway with some landscaping. And that's the project. Any questions?
Does that complete your presentation? Fantastic. Commissioner DeCardi, clarifying questions for the applicant.
Yeah, congratulations on getting to this point. I had two questions. Pardon me. One is, how do you measure vehicle trips? What's the measurement source and who does it and how the reporting goes?
So the vehicle trips are measured twice a year, and the methodology works through our traffic engineer. They do both video as well as the tracking at the driveways of the property, and then they come up with a count and submit that.
What's to prevent somebody who works in those buildings from parking someplace else and then not being counted?
Well, the counts aren't advertised, or it's just they're random days when they're taken. So I don't know how they would know to park somewhere else. It should be clarified too. The Phase 1 garage actually is well underparked. There's parking. There's abundant parking available. Not underparked, it's overparked. Let's see, underparked, overparked. There are stalls available on a regular basis.
Can I ask a follow-up on that? Why is that?
Well, as it turns out, the metric that we use for shared parking between the hotel and the office building was higher than it needed to be. There isn't the demand is not as high as was anticipated.
Do you know what went into that calculation? It seems like it was overproducing parking spaces.
I believe that part of it is the use, the Facebook use of the property. Being sales, a lot of their people are not in the building on a regular basis, so it just doesn't have the capacity that maybe a different office tenant might have.
And I had one other different question. So on the piece about the job train, labor training class and program, and the number of associates who live within 13 and a half miles and the local hires for the project, on one level the numbers look great and congratulations, although I realize I have no means of comparison to anything. Did you have a goal or a metric to hit and with this program, and have you hit it, or what was the original target to know whether this is excellent progress or not?
Yeah, that is one that I cannot answer.
Okay. I think to staff that would be good to know if we are considering future efforts like this associated with projects,
Right.
what we could learn from this project.
So there was not a specific metric for a number of individuals. It was just a requirement that they partner with JobTrain or a comparable program to operate, and it left it pretty open. So for future projects, if there's a desire, it's something to think about.
Thank you. And thank you for the presentation.
Sure.
So I am going to pause, call for public comment, and then bring it back up to the dais for additional comments and questioning for the applicant. So with that, I'll call for public comment, and if anyone has public comment, please come forward. I do not have any additional public comments on this item, so I'm going to close it and bring it back up to just where we were, looking for any additional commissioner comments. Okay, I will ask it up. Mr. Riggs?
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to comment, one, in appreciation that the Bohannon team has made this effort. They made a commitment, and they've spent 9 years following through on the details of this commitment. I personally think that Menlo Park did very well in working with the Bohannon Corporation. And then in particular, as an architect, I have to say, these buildings are visually just really successful.
Thank you.
We have had a couple of gripes, one stated and one unstated. The stated one, given the scale of things, is relatively minor. I mean, personally, I quite like the parking structure. It was just the ramp that's visible from 101, and perhaps trees on the edge of Caltrans will make that all blend in. And then the other was, I won't say it was unanticipated, but it was not really addressed. And that is just a lesson for the future. So I would actually speak to ourselves and our staff that acoustics being what they are, I didn't find it entirely surprising, but the freeway noise is now transmitted to Lorelei and Suburban Park and probably into Lindenwood in a way that it never was before. It was a very noticeable change with the tall, mostly hard surface materials bouncing noise back to the residential neighborhoods. And should we see projects along 101 in the future, I think we need to keep that in mind. But the most important takeaway on this project is that it's extremely attractive.
Commissioner Tate.
I just have a comment about Commissioner Riggs' comment there about the noise bouncing off the buildings. That's been something that we, as residents of Belhaven, have been dealing with for years. More and more noise from traffic. At one point, I was like, oh my gosh, did something happen to my windows? And I just recently installed new windows, so I know that it's not the quality of my windows. So I guess that kind of goes along with making progress, as some people call it, and development, is that noise is a factor, unfortunately, and my neighborhood has definitely taken the grunt. So sorry it's bouncing off into another neighborhood, but we are already experiencing it.
A couple questions to the applicant. I'm looking at 5.7 on D6, and it references these shuttles, which are relatively newly initiated, from Independence to the Redwood City Caltrain, which was started in June of last year, and then to Menlo Park Caltrain, which was started in November of last year. Are you able to say what the utilization of those are?
Yeah, so this, again, this condition was made obviously before we had a tenant in the building, and one of the things Facebook does very well is its traffic management and shuttle service for its employees. And so we have got these shuttles running, but they have very few occupants, even 1 to none in terms of their runs. And so it is one of the conditions that we believe in time should be removed if there is no ridership on these shuttles.
And tell me I can see the AM run 6:30 to 10:45. Is it one shuttle that goes out and back, or are there multiple shuttles on the same route? What's the frequency and how's it running?
I'd have to check on that exactly, the frequency. They have tracked the numbers though and had 0 to 1 rider on the runs though. So I'm not positive of the frequency.
Yeah, I'm just trying to understand the vehicle count, the trip count.
Yeah, I don't have that data either. They have been coordinating with our transportation division pretty closely on the implementation of those shuttles, but in terms of the frequency of the runs, I don't have that information. We could provide that to you though after the meeting or outside of it.
So question to staff, is there a mechanism for not letting the development off the hook for contributing resources to traffic management, but if you have a particular program like this which is underutilized, mechanism one would over a period of time say, look, we've been running this for X amount of time, it's a large enough sample size, we don't have ridership, and then going to the next step, which is, so if this phases out, how do we have them continue to spend money and work on mitigating trips, but in a different way? In the framework of an existing DA, is that possible to redirect resources to something else that might be more fruitful? How does that work?
So I think we need to focus mostly on the intent, which is the vehicle trip reduction. And so, I think we'll monitor over time how they're doing, especially since we haven't phased in the Constitution site yet. Those buildings aren't open, and so we'll have to see how those trips all net out. But I think if over time this gets added, I think we also need to be aware that tenants could change in the future as well, and so that might be another issue. I think it's something that we'll closely monitor and continue to work with them on. I don't know that our focus would be so much on the amount of expense, but in keeping the trips at or below the amount that's allowed.
Yes, I'm focused on the process for continuing to derive benefit from, because these were built at a time prior to the upzoning of the M2, and the economics of the development here are very different than what current developments have in terms of contribution to the community. And sure would hate to see this running just for the sake of running it, giving enough time to figure it out, and not just running it for the sake of running it, but deriving benefit in, it costs money to run these things. Let's use our money in a way that helps the community at some point. Not now, but as this thing kind of sorts itself out over time.
So the project does have a TDM program, and maybe resources could be shifted to other aspects of that TDM program. If it's found that the shuttle is not really panning out, there may be other ways that they could better spend the money.
Got it. Thank you. So question back to the architect, and I apologize. Please tell me your name.
Steve Buckholz.
Mr. Buckles. So, Mr. Buckles, the pictures that you've shown are all wonderful, and none of them offer a view from 101. The last year, when this was up for review again, there were two commissioners which voted to not, as the wording says, not vote to show that there's been good faith in performing what's been asked of what's called out in the development agreement. And it was more of a protest vote than anything. As much as I dislike protest votes, it was the only way that former Commissioner Onken and I had to say, how does the view from 101 get better? And it was not, it precedes me in terms of the plans that came in for that. But the net result is, when I look from 101 at the project and I see a very nice hotel, I see all the service buildings which block the lower part of the hotel, and then the juxtapositioning of the siting of the parking garage is done, and I don't know that the sides of it actually accomplished softening or otherwise integrating that structure well between the two structures. But we have what we have. And is there a way, so I'd like to get your thinking on that. The view from the other side is wonderful. The landscaping, it's a wonderful view if you're standing on the tenant side of the building. it's not such a great view if you're on 101 or on the other side looking at it. Do you have any thoughts on, do you agree or disagree with that? And I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on what could be done to otherwise soften it or make it more aesthetically appealing.
Yes, there have been some lessons learned from phase 1 to phase 2. I think overall the scale of the garage is large, and had we been able to potentially reduce some of the parking stall requirements, there would have been room for more of a setback from the 101. At this stage, I don't see that there's much. We have the plantings that will grow over time and help screen, but the scale, it is more of a lesson learned than it is something that I think can be fixed.
Yeah, so that's the juxtaposition of the parking garage between the two buildings and its siting, its location. So if we know that is that. Are you saying that in the intervening space between the highway barrier and the garage, there will be screenings that grow up, or are you referring to?
Yes. So there are already trees planted that will ultimately screen that view better than they do today. It could take 10 years, but there is a fire lane in between the two, and there isn't additional landscape room to do more than that. It is just that tight to the fence.
And then the hotel. So specifically, it's as you're looking from 101, you see the service buildings, you've got the ground floor service buildings, they've got to be at least 16 to 20 feet, and then there's Hotel Neo, which is a beautiful building in and of itself. Those service buildings that are between the highway and the hotel.
Is your question for more additional screening of those buildings?
Well, I wanted to get your thoughts on those, because last time we didn't have the opportunity to speak with an architect. It was more of a formulaic, here's what we're doing. We have a unique opportunity to speak with the architect on the project as it relates to that.
So it has similar trees buffering the right-of-way, the Caltrans fence. There's a landscape buffer, and then there's the project. So in time, those trees will grow up as well for the 1- and 2-story hotel development before you get to the taller hotel.
Do you have a sense of the height of those?
Well, ultimately, those are going to get up to 40 feet.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just going to take some time. I think they grow 2 feet a year, something like that. I think that's the...
Through the chair, if I may.
Sure.
Actually, the applicant team did provide us some more details. The landscape architect did provide us with details on the back of the Independence garage. And so there, as Steve is mentioning, there are a row of trees planted that should be between, I would say, roughly 40 feet in height at full maturity. And then directly adjacent to the back of the ramp, there are additional trees planted that could reach 40 to 50 feet in height at maturity. So there is a definite landscape buffer along the back. It just hasn't had time to fully mature yet.
Got it. Thank you. That's helpful. Okay, I am looking for any other additional comments. And for the benefit of my fellow commissioners, what we're looking to do here is to make a determination on whether the property owner over the course of the past year has demonstrated good faith compliance with the provisions of the Menlo Gately Development Agreement for the period of January 2019 through January 2020. Are we looking for any first on that? Commissioner Riggs.
Yes, I also move to make the findings.
We have a first from Commissioner Riggs. Commissioner Kale.
I'll second.
We have a first from Riggs, second from Kale to make the findings. Seeing no other comments or lights on, I'll call for a vote. All in favor, please raise your hand. Let the record show Commissioners Tate, Doran, Riggs, Barnes, Kennedy, DeCarty, and Kale all voting in the affirmative. It's unanimous. thank you, and this is the last time we'll be seeing you, looking to staff, Mr. Smith, this is the last time we'll be seeing
That's
these guys
correct.
in this context.
Yes, the development agreement, we will formalize a memorandum that closes out the project with them, noting your review, and you will not see them in the future.
Okay? Thank you. Appreciate it. Which leads us to the last item on our agenda. I need your agenda. I lost my agenda. I always lose my agenda. Okay, this is the last item on tonight's agenda, and this is F3, which is the public hearing portion of it, and G1, which is study session portion of it, are in the same staff report, and we will be going through them in two pieces. And I'll start with F3, which is the Environmental Impact Report EIR scoping session for 104 Constitution Drive, 110 Constitution Drive, and 115 Independence Drive, commonly known as the Menlo Portal Project. This is a request for a use permit, architectural control, environmental review, lot line adjustment, lot merger, below market rate housing agreement, and heritage tree removal permits to redevelop 3 parcels with approximately 335 multifamily dwelling units. So this is approximately 33,211 square feet of office and approximately 1,608 square feet of neighborhood-serving commercial space. The project would contain 2 buildings, a 7-story residential building and a 3-story commercial building with office use on the upper floors and the neighborhood-serving commercial space on the ground level. Both buildings would include above-grade 2-story parking garages integrated into the buildings. The project site is located in the RMUB, Residential Mixed-Use Bonus Zoning District. The project site currently contains 3 single-story office buildings that would be demolished. The proposed residential building would contain approximately 327,970 square feet of gross floor area, with a floor area ratio of 235%. The proposed commercial building would contain approximately 34,819 square feet of gross floor area with a floor area ratio of 25%. The proposal includes a request for an increase in height, density, and floor area ratio, FAR, under the bonus level development allowance in exchange for community amenities. The proposed project would include a below market rate housing agreement that requires a minimum of 15% of the units be affordable. The applicant is proposing to incorporate 15 additional market rate units, which will be included in the total 335 units per the density bonus provisions in the BMR housing program, Chapter 16.96.040, which allows density and FAR bonuses and exceptions to the city zoning ordinance requirements when BMR units are incorporated into the project. Good evening, Ms. Meador.
Good evening. Thank you for that summary. I just have a short presentation, which you have probably seen before, on the process for the scoping session and the study session. So this project, Chair Barnes summarized thoroughly, but I'll just go into like a little detail on like the site location, which is in the Bayfront area. You can see the building highlighted in a pink-red color there, and Highway 101 and Bayfront Expressway nearby. The applicant will also go into more details on the project in their presentation. So tonight we'll have 2 hearings. The first will be the environmental impact report scoping session. So this is the opportunity for the Planning Commission and the public to comment on what will be studied in the EIR. And for this part of the meeting, I would really try to focus on the topics you want to be studied in the EIR and save all design comments for the study session. The court reporter will be here to record any public comments on this portion of the project. but will not be here for the study session. So after the EIR scoping session, we will go into the study session where the public and the Planning Commission can provide feedback on the project plans and design details. There was one previous study session in July 2019. And also tonight, there will be no action taken on the item. It's purely just to collect feedback on the project. So the format we're recommending tonight is for the EIR scoping session. We'll start with the applicant's presentation and then a presentation by the EIR consultant, followed by planning commissioner questions, public comments, commissioner comments, and then closing of the scoping session. After that, we'll have the study session. We won't redo the presentations. We'll jump right back into commissioner questions, public comments again, and then commissioner comments. Other than that, we did receive 3 letters since the staff report was published. One was on BMR units. The other was from the Water Board, and the last was from Caltrains. So you should have those in front of you as well.
Thank you. Any clarifying questions for staff? Any questions for me regarding procedure? Seeing no lights on, I will say good evening to who? To the applicant. Good evening to the applicant. Before I say, well, I've already said good evening to you. I'd like to say good evening to the court reporter. You're always here silent. May I ask your name, please? Mark. Good evening, Mark. Thank you for coming again tonight. So with that, if the applicant would do your presentation on your proposal.
Of course. Thank you for having me tonight, Planning Commissioners. My name is Andrew Morcos. I am the Senior Development Director for Greystar in Menlo Park. What you see in front of you is our project Menlo Portal. It is in the M2 area of Menlo Park, which was rezoned for housing in 2016 due to significant existing office and office under development or zoned for development. About a month ago, I was here with you all presenting our other project, Menlo Uptown, which is a 483-unit housing project. In that presentation, I talked about how there are 2.3 jobs for every housing unit in Menlo Park. I explained that 4 of the 5 largest employers in Menlo Park are within walking distance of these sites. There are nearly 1 million square feet of office that are under construction today, which implies 5,000 additional employees traveling to and from this location. And that doesn't account for the zoning and future development projects. All this information demonstrates a significant number of jobs and not enough housing in this area for people to live in. The vast majority are getting here by car, causing traffic and pollution related to traffic. So today I want to focus on something else, the environmental impact of not providing housing near jobs. Over 200,000 people per commute over 2 hours daily to jobs in the Bay Area. Transportation emissions are the single largest contributor to CO2 production, and passenger car use is the single largest contributor to these emissions. Over 25% of California's carbon footprint comes from people driving cars. The only way we're going to start combating transportation emissions is by building housing near major employment centers like these. That all leads me to this project, Menlo Portal, which is across the street from the newly built buildings you were just hearing about, 700,000 square feet of office and the largest employer in Menlo Park. This housing project totals 335 multifamily rental units and 35,000 square feet of office, and we're working with the city to ensure compliance with all design standards. We've organized 2 community meetings on this project to date, and I've heard key themes concerning the city's future and comments about this project specifically. One is a need for affordable housing. This project will include at least 48 affordable housing units to be located on-site and distributed equitably throughout the project. Between our 2 projects, that totals over 120 affordable units that will be delivered to Menlo Park. We'll work with the community and the city to continue to determine levels. We've heard a lot of feedback about the BMR and affordability, and we want to continue those conversations with each of you to come to a solution that works for all of us. We've consolidated open space in a pocket between the office and the housing, and we've included almost 13,000 square feet of publicly accessible open space, which is over 50% more than the requirement. We're working with staff to determine our neighborhood benefit, but have included 1,600 square feet that could be contributed. We've made this site walkable and bikeable and are giving residents the best opportunity to work, to get to work through sustainable transportation. Lastly, Menlo Park has among the most ambitious goals in the country, environmental goals in the country. This project will be certified LEED Gold, operate with 100% renewable energy, provide substantial EV charging opportunities, and reduce the typical parking footprint by using parking stackers. It'll also be a fully electric building, no gas whatsoever. I'd like to compare the project you saw previously in July here to our current project. A few things we've heard at Planning Commission and through community meetings and through individual meetings have been reflected here. One is continued outreach to the neighborhood on neighborhood benefit and on the BMR proposal. We were asked to consider how to activate the publicly accessible plaza. Some of the ideas we brought to the table are gathering and seating areas, lush landscaping. We intend to include public art, movie nights, musical performances, and other events to draw the community to this area. We worked on the garage screening, are looking forward to comments based on previous planning commission comments. And we've started our outreach and support for Dumbarton Rail, which we really appreciated the kind of kick in the butt to start doing that. We're taking that seriously. We're meeting with key stakeholders to support that effort, and we'll be actively involved since one potential stop near Kelly Park is walking distance from this site. We're excited to continue towards entitlement with presentation of our notice of preparation, and we'll continue engaging the community for additional feedback. I wanted to introduce my team. Heller Manis is the lead architect, Clark Manis, and PGA is our landscape architect, and they'll continue the presentation from here.
Evening, Commissioners. You'll excuse me. I'm battling a cold like everybody else here, so I managed to. When we were here last time for the study session, several of you had some wonderful comments, and I think what we have here is reflected. Karen and I are going to basically take you through some of the changes that we made, and we're looking for your comments on that. Scope of the project is relatively simple, similar to what you saw before in terms of the size of the site, the Paseo orientation, the average height, parking, and bikes. One of the things that I think probably is the most significant that we will sort of touch on here is, one, Karen will talk a little bit more about the sort of increased character or increased augmentation of the pocket park that we've created between the multifamily and the office building. The second is, and Commissioner Riggs was good enough to sort of use the sort of nomenclature of looking at how we can make this a little bit more home-like. We've worked very hard both on the material character and the colors as a result of that. So what you see on the right is the office building. Bronze in color, glass is light in character for transparency, and the materials that you see on the material board that you have behind you are a combination of both a sort of white and a charcoal and accent of a sort of wood rain screen element on the corners in order to help warm the nature of the project up. And so that's looking into this open space here that we see as a real benefit in terms of those people who, one, are living there, working there, as well as any of the residents in the area who might see it's really seen as something that people would actually dwell in and use as part of that. Again, this is again that view looking at the street. One of the things that I think you certainly probably picked up in the staff report is we worked very hard in the minor and major modulation that was in the urban design guidelines. We've reflected a lot of those. I think there's still a couple of small items that we'll continue to work with staff on, but I think overwhelmingly, I think staff has been very happy with the orientation that we've created both on the street frontages and all around the building. Karen will talk a little bit more about this, and I think this is very similar to what you saw last time, but I think the thing that probably is most significant is the nature of the kind of uses that we see at the ground floor in the multifamily. We see them as places where people can actually provide activated use that are visible from this, public open space, and on the left side is the screening for the garage, and all the way at the end is the commercial use that we've been talking about relative to the community benefit opportunities. One of the things I think that probably is different, and I think we're actually very happy with it, is this sort of entry sequence sort of off of Marsh Road, and the use of materials that are warm in color, both that are connected to both the office building and the residential, I think are part of the tone that we're trying to set. Some of you talked last time about the nature of the screening. I think one of the things that I feel has been very important in this is to try and create a screening mechanism that will allow us to not actually see the cars, to provide a sort of filtered view of them, or a filtered view from the street, and what you actually see in there is the opportunity to create some sort of landscape vines that will actually, again, soften the character of that. And so, again, on the board that's behind you, the kind of materials that we're suggesting are ones that are basically used to screen the view of the cars. You saw this last time. I'll just sort of run through this very quickly. Configuration of the buildings on the U-shaped lot is no different than what you saw in the study session. Residential on the right, office building on the left. Probably the most significant difference in the configuration of the office building is the incorporation of the minor and major modulation. What you saw in the study session before is we took the approach that we didn't believe that they were applicable staff, and we have talked a lot about that, and as a result what you see is actually a reflection of that, and there's some technical things that probably we want to talk to staff more about, but the idea was to be able to sort of break that sort of square mass down, and what you see is the sort of fenestration both on the Constitution, Marsh, and frontages. Again, working your way up, this is the podium floor, and rooftop for the office building still is in place. We really see it as an opportunity. It's also on the east side, on the Marsh Street side, in order to provide the sort of separation and privacy for the residents over there. And again, just sort of working your way up through the building. And then lastly, of the section through the building. One of the overriding things that I think we have been very consistently trying to reflect here is trying to bury the cars from view in the residential project. There's only one portion that's actually along the fire lane where they're visible. The remainder are basically concealed within the below the podium level where the 5 levels of residential start. And then lastly, I want to turn this over to Karen. She's going to take you through a little bit more detail in terms of the development of the open space, both on the space that's fronting both the office building and the residential, and on the street frontages.
Hi there, thank you. My name is Karen Krolewski from PGA Design, the landscape architect for the project, and just going to take you through mainly the Central Plaza space, which is designed to be a vibrant, active, and publicly accessible open space. It's a generously sized plaza. It's 12,780 square feet. Its dimensions are 50 feet across and 175 feet deep. This is the approximate size and shape of the well-known Paley Park in New York City, which is a celebrated public space. The plaza's edges are designed to be activated by uses throughout the day and night, including residential and office amenity spaces, which will open out onto the plaza. as well as we envision outdoor dining areas that would connect with each of these spaces. The plaza's safety is enhanced through open sight lines, daytime and nighttime uses, and the overlooking windows of offices and residences. We imagine the plaza to be activated by things like activities such as outdoor fitness classes, office workers on lunch breaks, neighbors walking their dogs, outdoor cafe areas, and potentially even occasional outdoor movie nights or music performances. So we're designing a plaza that can kind of host all these activities and be a flexible outdoor urban space. The plaza also features gathering areas for groups of different sizes, ample seating and site furnishings, bike parking, decorative pavers, as well as lighting and a lush planting scheme, including a robust tree canopy. In addition, one of the focuses of the plaza will be a public art piece and wayfinding features to draw the public through the space into the site, into the informal seating areas. We hope and we are working with the neighbors at 111 Independence to coordinate the activity and uses of our space and to integrate the two. There's some tricky grading going on between the two sites, but we think we can work well with the adjacent site to connect those two spaces. And as you saw with the office space, we're able to provide enhanced screening around the parking garage side where it fronts the roads. We're continuing to work with the architect on that as well. And next, I'd like to hand it back to Andrew.
That's our presentation. Thank you, Planning Commissioners. We're open to questions.
So what we're going to do, when we have questions as it relates to architectural components, we'll get those questions in the second half of this. So stay tuned. We've got a load of those, I'm sure. We will progress now to the presentation by the city's EIR consultant.
Good evening. I'm Matthew Wiswell. I'm a planner at LSA. We are the city's environmental consultant for preparation of the EIR for the Menlo Portal project. With me tonight is Teresa Wallace, LSA's principal in charge. So this first slide lists the topics that I'll cover in my brief presentation tonight, including the purpose of the scoping meeting, an overview of the Connect Menlo EIR and its relationship to this project, the initial study that was prepared for the project, the EIR that will be prepared, and an overview of the environmental review process and schedule, and then we'll open it up to public comment. So the California Environmental Quality Act, or CEQA, requires that lead agencies that approve projects to identify impacts associated with those projects, and then either avoid or mitigate those impacts. So the purpose of the scoping session tonight is to engage interested parties early on in the environmental review process and to get your thoughts on the topics that should be considered in the environmental review of the proposed project. The merits of the project are not considered in the EIR, so your comments, at least for now, should focus on specific issues that relate to the environmental impacts. Comments should focus on the range of environmental topics that to be considered in the EIR, any specific issues of concern related to environmental topics that you think should be addressed in the EIR, and the approach and methods used in the analysis, as well as any potential mitigation measures or alternatives you think should be considered. So as you know well by now, Connect Menlo was approved by the City Council in 2016, and the Connect Menlo final EIR provided a program-level analysis of development in the Bayfront area, including in the Bayfront area, where the project site is located. The City of East Palo Alto challenged the city's certification of the Connect Menlo final EIR, and to settle litigation, the parties entered into a settlement agreement that allows for environmental review of a later activity, such as the proposed project tonight, that is consistent with the program of development to be limited to effects that were not analyzed as significant in the prior EIR or are subject to a substantial reduction or avoidance through project revision, but requires certain projects, including those utilizing bonus level development, like the proposed project, to conduct a focused EIR with regard to housing and transportation. Environmental review of the project will tier from the Connect Menlo EIR and will also comply with the terms of the settlement agreement. So as an initial step in the environmental review process, an initial study was prepared to evaluate the potential impacts of the project and determine what levels of additional analysis would be appropriate for the EIR. The initial study discloses relevant impacts and mitigation measures covered in the Connect Menlo EIR and discusses whether the project is within the parameters of the Connect Menlo EIR. I would like to note that although we are tiering off the Connect Menlo in terms of the maximum development potential we considered, we are also evaluating the project against baseline conditions as they exist today, and also evaluating the project against the currently applicable regulations and thresholds. For example, the CEQA guidelines were updated since the certification of the Connect Menlo EIR, and those changes were considered and addressed in the initial study review and will also be addressed in the EIR. So based on the conclusions of the initial study, the topics shown on this slide will not be further evaluated because the project is not anticipated to result in significant effects related to these issues, or because the initial study found that these topics were adequately addressed through the program-level EIR prepared for Connect Menlo. For the topics of cultural resources, geology and soils, which covers paleontological resources, hazards and hazardous materials, and noise, it was determined that applicable mitigation measures from the Connect Menlo EIR would ensure that these impacts would be less than significant. So the focused EIR will analyze whether the proposed project would result in a significant impact to these 6 issues listed on the slide. For air quality, the Connect Menlo EIR identified mitigation measures that require technical assessment of project operation and construction period air quality impacts. The site is also located in proximity to several major roadways, which requires preparation of a health risk assessment. For greenhouse gas emissions, the project's contribution to emissions will be studied based on the transportation impacts identified in the project. For noise, although the Connect Menlo EIR determined that impacts would be less than significant with implementation of recommended mitigation measures, there is the possibility that the transportation analysis conducted for the project will identify new or more severe impacts related to transportation, and therefore transportation-related noise. There would be more impacts related to transportation-related noise. So this topic will be addressed in the EIR. For population and housing, a housing needs assessment will be prepared pursuant to the terms of the settlement agreement with East Palo Alto, and this topic will also be covered in the EIR. And again, the terms of the settlement agreement require the preparation of a project-specific transportation impact assessment. This study will include an analysis of the potential impacts at 15 study intersections and an identification of project-specific mitigation measures in the transportation section of the EIR. And then you'll see tribal cultural resources listed on the slide as well. That will be included in the EIR based on any potential consultation with tribes under AB 52. So finally, the EIR is required to evaluate a reasonable range of alternatives. The alternatives should attain most of the basic project objectives and should avoid or substantially lessen any significant effects of the project, any significant impacts that are identified. The alternatives will be developed after the impacts are identified and with input received during this NOP comment period. A no project alternative will also be considered, which is required by CEQA, and a reduced size project may be considered based on the potential impacts. So this slide shows the anticipated schedule for the environmental review process. On January 7th, the city issued a notice of preparation, or an NOP, notifying interested parties and responsible agencies that an EIR will be prepared, and the initial study was included for review. The comment period to provide public comments on the scope and content of the EIR ends, as you can see, on February 7th. So during this time, which is right now, interested parties are encouraged to submit comments on the scope of the EIR in writing or verbally, which would take place tonight. Over the next several months, we'll prepare the EIR, and the draft EIR is expected to be published sometime in late spring. After the EIR is published, there's a 45-day public comment period. During these 45 days, interested parties will again have an opportunity to review the draft EIR and submit any comments to the city. The city will also hold another public hearing on the draft EIR during the 45-day comment period, and at that time, the public can also provide verbal or written comments. After the close of the public comment period, we will then prepare written responses to each substantive comment received on the adequacy of the EIR analysis in a response to comments document. The response to comments document will also include any revisions to the draft EIR, if any are necessary. Together, that draft EIR and the response to comments document constitute the final EIR. The final EIR will be published and available for review a minimum of 10 days before any hearings are held. Once the final EIR is complete, the city will consider certification of the EIR, and after that will consider approval of the project as a separate action. The public is free to attend these hearings and provide any comments on the final EIR. And as you can see, EIR certification is currently anticipated for fall this year. So again, just finally, the purpose of this meeting is to engage the public early on in the environmental review process and to get your thoughts on topics that should be evaluated in the EIR. Even if you provide your comments verbally tonight, we would encourage you to also submit them in writing, again, prior to February 7th before 5 p.m. And with that, we are available for your questions. Thanks.
Questions for the EIR consultant? Commissioner Riggs.
Yes, thank you. You know, it strikes me that my questions are more in the form of EIR comments. Would you like to hold those until after the public gets a chance to speak?
Yes, Commissioner comments
will
follow public comments. Thank you for clarifying that. If there's no, I'll call them clarifying comments to the EIR consultant, I will proceed now to call for public comment on the scope and then bring it back up for commissioner comments to the scope. So with that, I'll call for public comment on the EIR scope. I have one from a Mr. Zito for the EIR scope, and I've got another from Ms. Jones. Is this for the EIR scoping, or is this for the study session? Okay, so we've got Mr. Zito followed by Ms. Jones. Good evening, Mr. Zito. Thank you for coming. Please state your name and then political jurisdiction or organization.
Absolutely. Good evening, Matthew Zito from the high school, Sequoia Union High School District. District appreciates the opportunity to provide input on the EIR for the second very large project from Greystar. We remain concerned about the scale of all the recently proposed residential development in the Connect Menlo area. This project is right around the corner from Tide Academy, our new high school. This developer also has a very large project actually directly across from the high school that's also under review. I think between the two projects adds 900 units, either directly in front of the school or right around the corner. Up to 700 potential students will be generated through these two projects, plus other projects that are under your consideration. And we do understand that the Soprado Group is interested in perhaps building 800 townhomes in between Menlo Menlo Portal and Menlo Uptown. And so you have all of this cumulative impact. They've purchased 5 parcels already. The Connect Menlo EIR did not contemplate or analyze the district's ability to provide its public service in relation to Menlo Portal, its impact on Tide Academy, which wasn't even proposed, or the decision to rely on a Therefore, the district's position is that a focused EIR really is inappropriate in this particular situation. So we disagree with LSA on the exclusion of public service from the EIR for this particular project. I think that was an excluded category. We really feel that that's inappropriate to exclude that. You have all of this housing directly across the street from a brand new high school that's not at capacity even. Connect Menlo did not evaluate impacts caused by other projects on schools, and the statutory developer fees are woefully inadequate. They cover just a fraction of the cost of providing facilities. They cover nothing for the purchase of land, which we figure is about $12 million an acre out there right now. All potential impacts to Tide Academy must be studied. In particular, we really want the project will reduce pedestrian safety, increase accidents, slow emergency response, and perhaps other than student safety, this other situation will cause complete gridlock out there at least 2 times during the day. And if you don't think a high school can cause gridlock, go out to MA at 3:15 every day, and you can see the effect of that. The district requests that the EIR analyze and mitigate traffic safety concerns, and we would really like the EIR to review level of service, not just vehicle miles traveled. We really feel that a level of service analysis is much more appropriate. In addition to these direct impacts, the project exacerbates the lack of existing capacity in current facilities, particularly as related to traffic, since we have no room at MA, largest high school in the county, perhaps having students having to travel a very large distance from this particular area. So there is no capacity in the school that these residential developments reside in. We would really like, in terms of the scoping again, I just have a couple quick things. The EIR really must analyze existing or anticipated student movement patterns. This is all about safety, including school pedestrian movement, school transportation, and busing activities. We do have concerns about air quality. All of our students are sensitive receptors, and noise concerns during construction in particular. The district is interested in partnering with the city and developers like Greystar for the greater good to provide housing, but you also need housing for the students that these projects develop or create. And I must say, these 120 affordable units in the combined 2 projects, they're going to generate quite a few students. Looking at the Connect Menlo EIR, development was anticipated from 2016 to 2040, except in 4 or 5 years, you're going to reach the development potential that was anticipated over 24 years. And so to use that program EIR to kind of, in some ways, excuse the responsibility for doing more analysis, not stopping the project, but just doing more analysis, is a real concern to the district. This is coming very fast, very furious from the developers that are coming to present this to you, and the housing is a critical need, but you do have need to be able to house students as well. The district also, unlike Menlo Park City School District, also getting all of the development from Stanford and the El Camino Real special plan development. So those units are going to come online. They may produce fewer students than these units. You have thousands of units of housing online, and again, MA has 2,400 students, largest high school in the county. There isn't capacity there to absorb these students. TIDE was created to actually reduce MA's population to a more reasonable level. Certainly that doesn't look like that's happening anytime soon. Appreciate the opportunity to speak, and we really would like to spend some more time with Greystar, really talking about these things and real mitigation. And also things like our students are going to walk through all of your landscaping. So there's some things in terms of coordination that would really perhaps benefit you as well as benefiting us, because we'll all be out there together, right? It's a great thing having a high school or any school, but schools have real impacts on the development that surround them. Usually that's residential neighborhoods, but we kind of have a more, in my sense, a much more interesting mix of business, housing, and schools out there. But we really need to be able to work a little bit more closely, and we're just concerned about that program EIR, which is perfectly fine. We don't agree with the point that the developer fees meet the requirement for school housing. We think there's other requirements. But using that EIR that was commissioned and done almost in a different, it was almost done in a vacuum, right? So anyway, I don't mean to beat a dead horse. Really appreciate the opportunity to speak and hear more about the project. And we are looking, again, to be involved in the process as the EIR rolls out. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Next is Ms. Jones. And my last card is from Ms. Jones. So if anyone would like to give public comment, now's your time to please come forward. Good evening.
Good evening again. Pamela Jones, resident of Menlo Park, specifically in the Bellhaven neighborhood. I do not speak for the neighborhood. I speak for Pamela Jones, who has been a resident there for 45 years-ish. Maybe it's 47. You heard the statistics on the number of employees when the buildings over on Constitution, Menlo Gateway, and the MK Building 22, when they open. And we're only building 923 units. So clearly we have to build more units. So none of my comments have anything to do with the number of units. I want to applaud Greystar because I believe they've done fairly good outreach. I've sat in on a number of their presentations and have had private with them. And I'm wondering if out of that is where this additional 15 units came from, because they are aware that we do need housing. With all of that being said, I'm going to go back to go to their study when they do population and housing, that it has to include a detailed study of all the ongoing gentrification. They have to note the number of current residents in Menlo Park that are housing challenged, rent challenged. It's a fairly high percentage there. Because I'm looking at them increasing their BMR from 15 to 20%, and there needs to be another 30% of affordable. In that study, they should be noting the number of people that work in Menlo Park that live in beyond units. It's also causing us to have increased traffic. All traffic mitigation, given all of these projects, the fact that Tide Academy will have its full capacity by the time their projects are done, traffic mitigation must be done before they put one resident in any units over there. So I don't know how to work that out, but I think that's something that the developers can do. We can't wait until there's a problem before we try and fix it when we know there's going to be a problem, because we already have a problem. I'd also like to see them add into, I think, the transportation or amenities portion, accessibility from those units over to Kelly Park. Right now, that area will not be able to access Kelly Park, and the new comprehensive community center at the end of Terminal, given all of the traffic situation. And I want to be able to use their facility, and there's no way for me to really safely bike over there out of the Bellhaven neighborhood. And the last thing is, under tribal resources, they may not get quite the level of communication from the state level, because the state level, I understand, the Tribal Resources Department only has one or two employees, so it's hard for them to respond. So under that area, need to review all the projects that have been done over there from the beginning, because certainly there's been remnants found in that area, just as they have over at the Prologist former Hiller helicopter site. So I want to go back to the increasing the number of affordability units. Greystar was willing to give us more, 48% more open space. We need open space, especially in such a dense complex, but we also need to be able to have people afford to live there. Thank you.
Thank you. And so with that, I have no other comment cards, and seeing no one coming forward, With that, I will close public comment and bring it back up to the dais. And this is for commissioner comments specific to the EIR scope and not related to questions on the project per se. Commissioner DeCardi.
So on the alternatives, there's a no project alternative which you're mandated to do. And then the other alternatives will be determined at what point in this process so that people can comment specifically on them?
Well, first of all, if you have any thoughts about alternatives, we'd certainly welcome them right now. We don't want to rule anything out. But it begins with, so as a part of the project description, we'll determine some basic project objectives. And then at the point at which we identify any potentially significant impacts, we want to identify all those before we get into any alternatives, because really the basic goal of an alternative is to avoid an impact. So it really depends on what those impacts are. And so I hope that answers your question. There's not quite another time to provide input on what you think an alternative should be. So if you have any thoughts, we'd really welcome those right now.
Yes, we are in the commissioner comments on the EIR scope. So specific to the EIR scope?
Yeah.
How about it?
I think the conversation on a couple of the measures that you're going to take a look at again, my belief is that I understand that you're going to go through and figure out the impacts. I think on some of these measures, the impacts are already so high that any additional impact would be considered onerous. And so I think that specifically looking at transportation, and I think specifically looking at air quality, that having no increased impact whatsoever should be one of the alternatives that you take a look at, and then determine whatever mechanisms could be to actually hit that target. I think traditionally there's some look at these things to say, well, is there a percentage mitigation, or let's look at the additional impact separately. But if you're already over a threshold that is just not acceptable for impact on a particular neighborhood in a community in a particular time frame, then I think it warrants, at least on those two, looking at no net increase whatsoever for that reason.
Mr. Riggs.
One of my comments is, in essence, a follow-up on Mr. DeCardi's subject. I'll note that I, for one, and I think I've heard some other voices, have been asking over maybe the last year in particular that large new projects do two things. One is that they include an alternative that is no housing impact. In this case, that would be rather ironic. The other is that there would be an alternative with no traffic impact, as Mr. DeCardi has just mentioned. So I'll have to add my emphasis to that. I believe that that can be done, particularly since there is so much employment in the immediate area. We know that simply building the project will add traffic. I believe staff confirmed that about a previous project in that, housing project, in that the average unit might have 2 people in it, 2 people with excellent salaries. One of whom may work locally, maybe even at Facebook. The likelihood of the second one working locally is much, much lower. And then, as we know, people change jobs in the valley rather frequently. So one might move into one of these units, work for Facebook for 18 months or maybe even 5 years and then go to LinkedIn. Or, interestingly enough, Facebook might reassign you to Sunnyvale, which happened to actually one of our city council members who had just bought a home adjacent or within easy reach of the Menlo Park Facebook offices. He is now a commuter. So one of the alternatives needs to reflect a methodology that will not simply not increase the traffic impact. The second point has to do with non-automobile travel. I noticed that the project is designed with a very nice emphasis on pedestrian movement. But this kind of a neighborhood is not the same as our R1U or R1S or even an R1E in terms of mobility. When you walk in an R1U neighborhood, you have a front door every 50 feet. When you walk in an R1S, you might have a front door every 100 feet. When you step out of this building, you won't see another front door for at least a block, and it might be a long block. On the other hand, if you step out the door and get on your scooter, you will feel much more mobile, and I hope do so in order to avoid using the automobile. So I'm wondering if the project EIR can base an alternative on scooter transit that is not a zero increase in traffic, but is a very different kind of traffic. And then when we get to the project design review, we can talk about how the site and building can reflect that alternative. So for the EIR, that's my comments.
Commissioner Tate.
So my comment is back to affordable housing, and 20% sounds like a decent number to come in, and it looks like quite a few community members are thinking the same way, at least 20%. So I definitely hope that you take a better look at that as opposed to just the 15.
Thank you. Mr. Kale.
Thank you. Mr. Zito spoke passionately about the impacts to the schools, in particular the Sequoia Union High School District. I also want to mention something I said at the last Gray Star presentation, is that with all the new housing here, it's going to be, from my estimation, more than enough to support an elementary school, and that should be considered in the EIR as well.
Looking for any other commissioner comments on the EIR scope? Question as it relates to the methodology on the EIR scope. As I look at this project, and of the 335 units, 289 are one bedroom or less, one bedroom, junior one bedroom studio, and only 13% are 2 and 3 bedrooms. So when you're developing the methodologies for trips and impacts, how are you ascribing people count to different room sizes?
So I will note that we are not the transportation engineers, so we can answer that question somewhat generally. But if you have a more in-depth question, maybe we could pass that along to the transportation engineer. But generally, trips are generated.
No, I'm sorry. So we have room sizes. Mm-hmm. We have one bedroom and less, which is 67% or 87% of the units. When you look at those, how are you figuring how many people, how many bodies are in a particular room? And so if you could just talk to that methodology, having nothing to do with transportation, just...
Sure, I understand. We are preparing, not us particularly, but we have a sub-consultant who's preparing, as was mentioned previously, a housing needs impact. And as a part of that, I believe it'll look at trends throughout the city and the typical population within the different types of units that you've mentioned, and we'll present that data, and that'll be part of the EIR. So I can't answer immediately the methodology right now, but there will be a figure for that presented in both the housing needs study and in the population and housing section of the EIR.
And that'll get modified or somewhat adjusted for potential demographics in that area.
Correct.
So said differently, you've got an employer in the area, and you may have younger folks in there, in particular, however many to a room, and that'll all get figured into the methodology. Correct.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you, Commissioner Kennedy.
So, through the chair to staff.
Yes, please.
So, a question. So I don't know if this is EIR related or it's the project, but, and I think I say this often, but every time we sit here and we hear a new project and we talk about housing, we assume two types of residents, right? So it's dual income, no children, or families. And so there's an entire population in this community, the larger, broader Menlo Park community, of people over the age of 65 who are in houses that are either too large or they can no longer afford the upkeep on, and they would like to stay in these communities, and there's no place for them to downsize to go to. I would love for there to be an opportunity to look at, and maybe this is in the housing study, on who the user group is. Because if you can free up existing capacity and move people out of homes that maybe are too large or they don't, they'd like to downsize and stay in the community, then you open up those homes that are more family friendly for people to move into, maybe out of these apartments that are 1 and 2 bedrooms, because these are not for families. So the supposition that all of these housing units is going to create a demand for a new elementary school or even a demand for additional high school seats, I don't think it's borne out. So I would like us all to sort of look at how we approach the housing need in Menlo Park to be more than just for people between the age of, for lack of a better range, 25 to 65.
Thank you, and I'll tail on to the back of that. I wasn't clear within the work that you're going to undertake how it relates to the need for facilities for, whether it's educational, whether it's elementary, middle, or high school. Is there modeling that you're going to do to come up with the impact, which takes into account demographics? There may in this area, I have no idea, maybe all young folks that aren't generating any types of kids that are going, or it could be the inverse. Do you model for what the increased demand will be on the school system, and at what ages and what types of school-age kids?
For public facilities in particular, no. In this case, we are relying on the Connect Menlo EIR, which included an assumption for the total population generated by new development in the area, and then looked at the existing facilities and in that way determined whether or not new facilities would be needed just based on the population count. And so we would be, because this project is consistent with the development assumed in the Connect Menlo EIR, we would be tearing off that analysis.
And so the Connect Menlo EIR has in there net new dwelling units, and in that programmatic EIR, is there any check to see if there's a disparity? So as long as it's within the net new residential units that were contemplated under the Connect Menlo programmatic EIR, when it's within that unit count, you're relying on that information. Is that correct?
Yes.
And how do we know if there's a real disparity between what that was modeling out and what we might see? Are there sanity checks along the way? For the bodies may stay the same, the net new units may stay the same, but the demographics might be different than we anticipated. Is there a check and a balance that happens along the way?
So I would just add that, we've heard the comments from the school district and the concerns there, and so we'll certainly be going back and discussing this issue with city staff to see if there are other items that should be added to the EIR.
Okay, so for the record, my request is that there is a re-looking at the assumptions in the programmatic EIR and making sure that's tethered to what we think we're going to see in this location. And I want to emphasize, this has nothing to do with the funding. I mean, we've got, there's ways that school facilities need to be funded, and some of the Prop 13 subsidized residents of the community, should bear the burden of this, and I don't believe that it necessarily falls on the housing generators. So it's a very different discussion, but just from the impact, ferreting that out, I think is an important data points to have.
And if I, just for my clarification, specifically related to demographics and the type of user in the site, is
Yes.
that correct? Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Riggs.
To at least some degree, I would like to echo those comments, although I come at it from a slightly different point of view. A comment which I've made, I think, over several years, including in 2016 with the Connect Menlo EIR. I have to question the assumption that when you build a 3-bedroom on Independence or Constitution, that means you're going to have a family with babies and teenagers. I have to question it because simply looking at, say, a 2-bedroom in a building like this, I have to figure that the rent is going to be in the $6,000 a month range, maybe higher. And it's going to be occupied between 2 and 4 techies who are going to share the space, share the rent, and work nearby. If you have a 3-bedroom, it's going to have between 3 and 6 techies who are going to be sharing the rent, sharing the space as a crash pad. A family is not going to, in my opinion, spend $6,000 a month on a 2-bedroom in a high-rise in an office area rather than spend $6,000 a month on a 3-bedroom, 2-bath, 60, 70-year-old home in a quiet neighborhood like Lorelei or Suburban Park that has a backyard and a 2-car parking garage. It simply doesn't make sense once you have children. So I understand that if you do a survey of Menlo Park, you will get information that reflects predominantly single-family house behavior and use. If you do a survey of the condominiums between El Camino Real and the Caltrain tracks, you're going to get a somewhat different demographic. And then if you upgrade that to current building standards and marketing, you'll probably rule out the last of the would-be family occupants. So I think if we're going to put forward projections regarding student body count impact, we have to look at if we're going to refer to an existing condition, that condition has to be relevant to the product being built.
Great. So looking for any additional comments as it relates to the IR scope. If there are none, and I see no lights on, what I'll do is close the public hearing, this portion of the public hearing as it relates to the IR scoping session, and then reopen it up for the project proposal scoping session, starting with a quick intro by staff, and then moving right to commissioner questions related to the project. So seeing no lights on, I will proceed to do that. I'm going to close this portion of the public hearing and check in with my commissioners. Is there a need for a 5-minute break, or shall we continue the long march? Okay. We'll move into the project proposal study session, and back to Ms. Meador for your introduction.
I don't have anything to add. The materials board should have been passed around, one for the residential building and one for the office building, so if you haven't taken a look at that, please do. Otherwise, I think the applicant's presentation covered everything.
You know that Dana White is older than you. Better looking too, I'll tell you that. Okay, great. Thank you for that. And then quickly we will move into commissioner questions on the project, which, you know what I'll do right now is I'll call for public comment to see if anyone wants to give that, and then we'll move to commissioner questions. So if anyone would like to give public comment on this item, I have no more cards related to that. And seeing no one, I will proceed to close public comment and then come back to commissioner questions. So we will have commissioner questions and then commissioner comments. I think we can blend the two, comments and questions, together, since we'll move right into the final part of tonight's agenda. Commissioner DeCardi.
I'll just stick with questions for right now. This is around the BMR. So there has been a lot of comment. The 15% really appreciate it, but the question about 20%, and then also at what level of BMR and that mix of level. I think when you were here last time, we asked that same question. I wonder if you had any further thinking on that. So is it possible at all, based from your perspective, to go to 20%? Why or why not? And then also the various levels of below market rate housing and that mix and what that might look like.
Sure. So just to kind of get us on the same page, the requirement per the ordinance is 15% and averaged at low. And the complication when it comes to the BMR proposal and the final BMR proposal is that it's very tied in with the community benefit process. And that has been going. We're working with the city on that. But until we have a full picture of what's going to be required through the community benefit process, or if BMRs are going to be what is requested as part of the BMR as a community benefit process, we can't, they're coupled. And I can't give you a firm answer either way until that's further along, unfortunately. But I want to acknowledge we've heard loud and clear that there's a request for additional BMRs and are taking it very seriously.
I'm tempted to ask at least for some framework about what levers are in the coupling, but can imagine that it would just stay theoretical, so I won't do that. Two other questions. One is, from the last time you were here, the city has placed a ban on natural gas in new construction. How onerous has that been for you in rescoping this project? How expensive was it? Do you have a comment on how difficult it was to meet that?
Yeah, I do. I think this is kind of an overall challenge that we've taken on, and happily to have the privilege to be part of the Menlo Park community and engage with the Menlo Park community comes with challenges. And there's been changes since we entered into contract on this project, which kind of sets basically our land value. Anything that changes from then on is almost always an increase to our cost and affects, to my previous point, kind of what we can do on the BMRs or the community benefit basis. To speak to your specific question on the full electrification ordinance, we saw an increase of about almost 5% on our total construction budget, and we still haven't figured it out because the state hasn't provided the necessary pathways for us to model our Title 24 requirements, our electrical requirements, and our ability to comply with code. So it's a process that is continuing at the moment. That's our estimate.
Is it fair to say that may be a conservative estimate, and then as you know more, that may come down over time, realistically?
I think that's probably an aggressive estimate. As we go through installation, I think it'll probably increase, to be totally honest with you.
Interesting, thank you.
Yeah.
And then I had one other clarification on the building design. So the proposed community-facing portion of the office building, is that 2 stories? Is that an atrium on the plans? Or
no.
Okay.
There is commercial space on the first floor that we've kind of reserved for community benefit, and then there's office space on the third floor.
Yeah, so it's the commercial space. I mean, is that 2 floor? Is that, or is that 1?
Floors, right? These two.
Yeah, Commissioner DeCardi, it's actually the portion of the height that would be the same as the parking. Since the office is a single floor, whatever that commercial space, it's the
2 layers
ground
of
level.
parking.
It's whatever that height is. So it's actually a taller space, but it is definitely not an atrium.
Yeah, I'm sorry, my bad choice of words, but it's thank you, that piece, that's helpful. Thank you.
Commissioner Kale.
Thank you. A related question to that. So there's about 1,600 square feet of commercial space. Where exactly is that? That's all in the office building?
It's all in the office building, yes.
And that's
to the right.
On the on sheet A005, I'm looking at a sort of a pinkish color.
Yes, correct.
A005.
And that's a 2-story space?
It's 2 stories of parking and 1 story of office.
If you can go back.
Right, it's tall.
And that's 1,600 feet?
In the front left-hand corner of the office, that's 1,600 feet. That's double height, as Commissioner DeCardi pointed out. Yeah.
It doesn't seem like it's 1,600 feet compared to, well, I'm not sure what to compare it to. Compared to some of the parking spaces, it looks like it's less than 1,600 feet.
It should be. We've been very particular about the square footage takeoff, so
okay.
I'd be surprised if it wasn't, but I hear you.
And what, just to give me a sense of what could go in there, is that a small restaurant? Is that a Starbucks? What kind of retail or commercial space could fit in there?
Yeah, so the city has a community benefit list that we will work with to determine what goes in this space. Some of the spaces that are identified through that community benefit list are neighborhood serving retail, so a cafe, It could be a nonprofit space. It could be what we've heard from the community is that they'd like some community space. And so we're evaluating all of those, trying to get feedback from you all and the community to determine what it ends up being.
So if that's not a retail space, I heard some talk about outdoor eating spaces. What serves the outdoor eating spaces? Is that just people bringing their lunches?
Yeah, it would be, what we'd like to create here is a lot of indoor-outdoor space. So residents in the morning or at night eating outside, or kind of office workers from the 2 office buildings on either side of this project or in this project eating lunch in that area.
And across the plaza there, I see a larger space that's a business center. What is that? What will that be for?
We used to call them business centers. I think we'll call them something like co-working space now as a resident amenity. So imagine desks, phone booths, spilling out into that community area, the publicly accessible open space, to activate it along that frontage.
And who gets to use that? Is that open to the public, or is that residents only?
The internal space is residents only.
And is that rental spaces, or is that open? Do you have to rent it like you do the Blue, I forget what it's called, Blue Bottle, Blue Cafe downtown, or is it just open to the residents?
We haven't quite thought about it. In the past, they're typically just open to any of the residents.
Okay.
At their leisure.
All right. Switching gears to the plaza, talking about how it connects to 111 Independence. You mentioned that you're talking to those owners about integration, but does that, I mean, in my mind's eye, I want to continue that plaza into 111, but it looks like it might just stop or turn, or any idea of how that's going to work?
Yeah, so the challenge here is that our grade, because of requirements, has to be at a different level than 111 Independence's final grade. And so at that point, there's going to be a grade difference. It causes a little bit of a challenge in terms of the integration, but what we want to do is create, I've suggested to the community and got some positive feedback, a movie screen, because on 111 Independence's side, there is a basketball court on that side. So where we do want to integrate is kind of on the edges of our building, if the, kind of the bottom left-hand corner of our site. We want to coordinate with 111 such that as long as possible, the grades can be consistent, and then at the last moment where they have to, they would separate a little bit.
Why wouldn't 111 also be subject to the same raising up to, I think it's for floodplain issues?
Yep, so any site less than 2 acres has a different grade requirement than sites. I believe that's the case. I would have to confirm with staff. Karen, do you want to talk to the...
The 111 site is just a 3-foot rise, whereas our site is a 5-foot rise.
I see. And that's going to be an 8-story building, from what I can tell.
111.
Yeah, 111.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
And it has to do with proximity to, like, the further away you get from the bay.
I see.
that
Okay.
Basically, it lowers. Yeah.
Thank you. I want to talk about the screening for a minute. So, when I first saw this, I thought it was for the residential, the 7-story building along the sort of the dog path area. What drawing would show me what that looks like, and the screening that would be visible from there on the 2 stories? Is that A24?
On the office building?
No, on the
residential building. I don't think we have a rendering of that near the dog walk area.
So essentially, is that a 2-story parking facing that area?
Yes.
And that's the metal screening that we see on the... No.
That would be a green wall. So where you look at that service lane, this is as a result of the discussions with the fire district. That linear line is a service as a fire lane. That wall there is a two-story wall, and we see it as a green wall. What you are talking to is the metal screening, which is on the office building, which screens the parking that basically fronts Constitution and that portion of Marsh over there. That's what that is, and it actually there's a small portion of it that actually is on the park side too. So the metal screening with the landscaping is on the office building. There is no metal screening on the residential building, and it would only occur on that service lane side. The rest of it is occupied uses.
That helps a lot. Just to clarify, so what sides would we see the screening on the office building?
So this rendering in front of you, okay, you can see it on your screen?
Right.
Right? So below the one-story office, that is a screen that we're talking to. That's a screening that's actually on the board. And what we see it as a sort of basis for being able to allow vines and the like and actually to grow up, as you can see on the rendering.
And does that turn the corner as you go down to the right?
Yes, it does.
And it's just those two walls, or is it all four sides?
It's actually three walls. The wall that backs up on 111 is actually solid.
Okay, so it faces the plaza then as well?
Correct.
And in the evening, we'll see some lighting kind of filtering through that, I would imagine, from the parking area?
So my opinion is that you really don't want to see the car lights at night. They tend to be too harsh. The intent here is to try and mask them, to use a screen that's actually dense enough and with some so that you don't see actually a lot of light leakage through there. Because your arrival port or sequence is actually from this view over here off of Marsh.
And eventually, assuming the ivy or whatever will cover that up. Okay. And then the last question is just if you could speak for a second of just of the office. It seems like there's two levels of parking with a third level of office that's larger than the parking. It seems like it overhangs on more than two sides, perhaps. Why is there such a large ratio of parking to a large not oversized, but larger than lower floor area?
So let me back into your question. The footprint that you see on the screen is the footprint of the 32,000 square feet of office that we're providing, that we're entitled to. We have not, as a result of what you see here, it expanded the footprint of the parking to be the same as the office building above. That's why what you see in that view is that it's recessed and it's basically sort of floating on top of the idea is to try and not make it as sort of massive. If you brought the face of the office building facade down, the idea is to try and sort of minimize it. So it's essentially sort of floating up there. The idea is to try and make it transparent and light, and then the parking is sort of underneath there.
Is any of this parking for the residential building, or is this all office parking?
Solely for the office building.
I'm having a hard time understanding the ratio. Why essentially 2 floors of parking for 1 floor of office?
I believe our ratio is around 2.7%, 2.7 times for every 1,000 square feet of office, which is in the range. We also do have that 1,600 square feet of space at the first floor that we want to accommodate.
Okay, and my last question/comment is similar to on the previous project, is that the pool area and the courtyard space of the 7-story residential building, I'm just concerned that's going to be in shadow most of the time. It'll get some light probably in the late afternoon, but otherwise there's, I don't know, 4 or 5 stories above that plaza level, and I just don't see that's going to get a lot of natural light, given the ratios.
I think that's part of the challenge, being in a, next to an 8-story building. The good thing about, 111 Independence is their kind of podium is kind of near ours. And so the 8 stories of their building at least has a little bit of buffer to our podium level.
Okay. Those are my questions. I have just a couple quick comments, since you said to wrap it in together. That's all right?
You can choose to come back, or you could choose to do it now.
I'll just do it now. I do appreciate the methods where the cars are buried, as was commented earlier. I would say, I know these are preliminary, but would like to see better elevations, more at a larger scale than the tiny drawings we have, as well as some more 3Ds that would help with the visualizing what this will look like. And the overall design, I think, works really well. I'm a little concerned about as I mentioned for the previous project, the metal that's simulated to look like a wood product. It seems like ideally I'd prefer a product to look like what it is and not try to be something else. So that's my only comment, is I would prefer to rethink that material. Otherwise, I think the overall design is really, really nice.
And Commissioner Kale, what I would ask of you is any views that you think that you'd like to see of the project. This is what you see in all this stuff here. These are all taken from a three-dimensional model that we have been using to develop the design. If there are some particular views, vantage points that you feel that you'd like to see, all we need to do is know that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Before I recognize Commissioner Kale, I want to point out to my fellow commissioners on page 18 is the staff's enumeration of 3 areas: site and building design, public open space, and public serving commercial space that focus feedback would be helpful on. So to the extent you want to avail yourself of that. Commissioner Kennedy.
So with regard to the community spaces, the public benefit spaces, can you walk me through how these spaces are intended to be used, and how do you define the community that is benefiting from this? And give me a little bit of sense of that.
Sure. So through Connect Menlo, there's a list of community benefits, and our intent is to reflect what's being asked of us and putting suggestions out there. We've put suggestions out there for kind of physical space in our buildings, such as a nonprofit office. It could be a cafe or some other type of retail. We are getting a retail consultant involved to help us ensure that this space will be active and vibrant. It's important that it can, whoever operates out of here can do so successfully.
Right, so that would be some type of navigated feasibility study based on who you're intending the tenants to be, correct? Right. So and then I'm assuming that the nonprofit or the co-working space would be some type of an impact hub, right? That would generate some type of entrepreneurship base that would happen there, and that's all great. But then it gets to this whole purpose of this. The entire project is so far on the edge of the community, Menlo Park to begin with, but it's, for me, looking at this, it's only whisperly adjacent to Belhaven because it doesn't speak to anything about how this ties into that community. None of these things do. None of these projects that come before us actually have any real connection to solving the issues that our neighbors in Belhaven and that community have been asking for and speaking to for a very long time. And so, it appears to be a very attractive building, but does it solve for anything that we're attempting to solve for here? So I would really think about which community you're attempting to, to provide any community benefit for, and who benefits overall from this being built. And, Commissioner Riggs mentioned, the rents of $6,000. I probably think they're even higher, because just looking around. And also the units that are created here don't create any opportunity for the secondary services that come with single homes or even condos or townhouses, right, where you have little backyards, and you might have a gardener, or you might have a cleaning person come. I imagine that some of the amenities in this building might be some type of concierge service, right, which really removes any secondary job market from people participating in this either. So I think mine was more of a general comment. And when you start to look at what the community benefit is, really think more broadly about the overall community and not just the community that you're creating here for the benefit of the developer.
I think that's a very fair point. And what we've done is included this so that we can show something. Until we go through that community benefit appraisal process, it's tough to gauge exactly what the package is going to be. One of the things, just kind of going off of what Ms. Pan-Jones suggested, is right now there's not really a connection to Kelly Park. And that's something that's really important, not just for Belhaven residents to get here, but for our residents to go that way. And it's an important aspect of making sure these don't become two disparate communities, but they really are just one community, and really all of Menlo Park has access to it.
And I appreciate that you said that. I also appreciated that you mentioned earlier the interest in a Dumbarton Rail corridor, that reactivation of that, and how you would then be able to create, this would not stand out so much as an island, or any of these things would not stand out so much as an island, because there would be something providing some method or mechanism of connectivity, because no one has yet to bring here an overlay that says, and now here's how we connect all these things.
Mm-hmm.
Because at some point, somebody's going to come to us and say, "Oh, look, we solved for it, and it was an error that we found it, but we actually did find this." Because at some point, there is going to have to be that.
Absolutely, I totally agree. And part of what we want to do through the Dumbarton Rail exercise and continuing to be involved is transportation in this area is not what it's going to need to be once all these people are there. And so we need to start advocating now for more shuttle services, making sure that the city and that transportation in the area will be able to service these so that there are multitudes of options for people not to get in their car.
Menlo Park in 15 minutes, like what they're going to do in Paris.
Commissioner Riggs.
Thank you. And thank you to previous speakers, both from the floor and here, to bring up connectivity to Kelly Park and the issue of who this purple service shape serves. Personally, I think it's going to end up being a coffee and snack shop, because there won't be one within many blocks, and that's going to be what's most wanted, and that will be it. But that's for you to develop. And I also want to make sure I've noted my continuing support for anything that you can do with the Dumbarton Rail. Given I realize that it's hard to reach the livers on that particular project, let alone have a lever large enough to move it. But I appreciate anything and everything. So you would have heard me earlier speak about the neighborhood scale. So I'd be curious if you have some thoughts on moving from, not leaving it behind, but moving on from the pedestrian orientation and focus to the short-term transit, which I'm just guessing is going to be bikes and scooters?
I am extremely receptive to that idea. Anything that can get people out of their cars and using the bike paths, whether it's bicycles, scooters, or other means of transportation, I'm fully on board.
Well, so I'm not trying to do any social engineering. I'm just saying I think that's going to happen.
Mhm.
So, and in the plan, because to be fair to Karen, I haven't really studied the plan in those terms, but I didn't get the impression that it was worked out in terms of scooter transit. And I will tell you that even for bicycles around Menlo Park, not everyone wants to use the bike lane in spite of the money and compromise that we put into them, and they use the sidewalks, and they sometimes ride backwards, because if you ride against the grain on the sidewalk, you don't have to sit and wait for 2 left turns in order to get back on what should have been a 4-minute ride. So that's an existing, 1940s and 50s layout of a city, but this is new, so I'm just encouraging that be thought through.
Okay.
And then just a question. Should we, and that this would be for Graystar and Helen McManus, but also for staff, should we consider some of the automobile parking spaces being scooter and motorcycle spaces? Certainly, if I were commuting here from San Mateo, or I rented here and my office got moved to San Mateo, or Sunnyvale, since that was a real-life example, I would be traveling on 2 wheels, because that way you can actually get somewhere. So
If I
just
could
guessing
offer,
you may have more of a demand, that's all.
if I could offer a potential suggestion on that, our parking is actually at a premium on this site. We have 1-to-1 unit to parking ratio. We have 1.5 to 1 bike parking ratio, and I think scooters, at least in San Francisco where I live, scooters are actually going often in bike parking spaces. And so maybe there's a way we could work with you and the staff to allocate certain of the bike parking spaces, which in my opinion are probably oversubscribed in this project, to other modes of transportation.
I think that's a great idea, and the people that I know with bikes, they're not going to leave them anywhere but in the living room, because they spent too much money on them, and they tune them and stuff. So that's a great idea, and you're so lucky you wouldn't be working with me, you'll be working with staff.
Wonderful.
So we talked about the commercial space. I just wanted to note, especially if I'm looking at this cover sheet, AOO, that wonderful warm horizontal material is going to work or not work based on the corner details. And we have a couple of examples of recent, meaning within the last 6 or 8 years, buildings in Menlo Park, of how you can take materials with a lot of potential and really mess them up. So I'm expecting, actually, from your architect, you'll have this covered, but I wanted to note that it's...
You are right, Commissioner Riggs.
And AOO4D. Oh, yes, that's a wonderful image with mature tree trunks. And it, I haven't properly compared with the landscape plan. Often we get presentations that show one thing on a landscape plan, but then the illustrator puts in something that works better. So I want to say that, in my opinion, those tall tree trunks are a real winner in this environment. They give it a texture that you just wouldn't have. And obviously, you won't have them immediately, but it's a wonderful long-term goal, and if that's what you're planting, that's fantastic. The residential building entry, let's see, what sheet should I go to for that? I don't think I'm going to make any comment on that. I think it would be a matter of opinion or taste, and I think you can and will make it work. Okay, so we won't touch that. Question about the chrome screen with the tight square holes. This is on basically parking level elevations. And I see it's panelized. But I'm also hearing talk of ivy growing up the parking facades. Is there confidence that ivy will grow on that kind of a screen?
No reason why you wouldn't. And the other thing I wanted to just clarify on the material, since it was not readily available, it shows as a silver color. The idea is actually to use a sort of bronze color more consistent with the color of the metal for the office portion above. So that's actually what you see in the rendering. So the board, unfortunately, we couldn't get that particular color, but we got the pattern. And so there should be no reason why ivy or some sort of vine, and Karen's much more expert than me, wouldn't allow it to sort of climb up there easily. I think it's just a matter of being able to find the right kind of vine relative to the light conditions.
Yeah, we can certainly find a vine to grow on that material. Probably like a ficus would grow on that pretty easily.
Okay, if you're going to plant a ficus vine, you just have somebody around to prune it, that's all.
Yeah.
But yeah, that'll grow on most anything. If it can get past, I don't know what will be the heat zone here, probably only just the lower 8 feet or something, and after that it's shaded.
Yeah, and we have other methods to, we could also introduce like a cable as well that's maybe in front a little bit, and there's lots of ways to
Sounds like you'll
address
make
that.
it work.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. And then, I don't know if there's a elevation or rendering of the walls interior to the courtyard. But if I understand it, that's where the most of the stucco is that right?
So I'm going to get to it here. So I'll just sort of articulate this. We've had discussion with staff, and the requirement for Menlo Park under the design guidelines that every facade needs to be no more than 50% stucco, and the other is the rain screen or cementitious fiber. So that's actually what would occur on this as it did on the exterior elevation. So that's the way we're approaching this.
So how do I read that? Because all the white looks like it's...
You're just looking at an elevation. It's not identified as a color right now. It was actually more section relative to the explanation about how the residential portions that front the streets and the parking is. So that portion is not rendered, what you see in white.
What I meant was, how do I read what part is stucco and what part is cement panel?
That we'll come back to. We'll work with staff on that. We spent a lot of time on the exterior. We didn't deal with the inside of the courtyard. And actually, what you can see if I go back here is that a portion of the courtyard. In the section that you were looking at, you only actually see the long portion that faces east. There are portions that face north and west and south too. So we'll end up ultimately elevating those, but we spent the majority of our time really addressing the exterior expression.
Okay, fair enough. And then on A016, A019, there's a reference to projections into the setback.
I think it's behind because I think it's in his fuller set. Is it in the back? Commissioner Riggs, tell us again what sheet were you talking to?
A016.
Okay.
And then these pages, 016 to 025 or so,
Yep.
they're color-coded, basically.
They are compliance diagrams relative to the work with staff on setbacks that are required. So that's what these are about. They're not rendered relative to the color of the material. They're compliance diagrams.
Oh, no, I know what they are.
Yeah.
I've had to go off for a cup of tea, realizing that I was drawing more of these for submission than I was of the floor plans and elevations, yes.
Correct.
I know too well. But there just happens to be this category in this sort of raspberry color that is labeled building projection beyond required setback. Oh, you mean additional setback? I'm just clicking. I was thinking it was into.
This is the minor and major modulations in the code.
Which I'll have a comment on in a moment. And then on 19, you have a blue code for building projections, but I couldn't find any blue.
I believe it's the top. It shows as gray.
Oh, well, you changed colors on me. That's not fair. I'm a volunteer. You can only do that.
Actually, if you look on sheet
Paid
21,
Yeah.
next one, there's your blue color.
Well, yes, but when I look at 21, which is also on my list, there's no key to what the blue
I see
and
that.
the olive are.
I see
So,
that.
I'm starting to get a better idea of what it is. Like, it's not that I'm missing some awnings or anything.
No.
But,
no.
so maybe the color keys could be, you go to A23, and building entrance is beige, and garage opening is raspberry, but they're in the same boxes. So,
Yeah, the sort of orange color at the top two is the garage opening, and the bottom, or the two in the middle, represent the building entrances.
yes, which include the garage opening again. So, anyway, just to make it a little more readable for volunteers and others, neighborhood members, whatever. It's small stuff that always gets through, but I couldn't use all those expensive sheets. And finally, and somewhat more positively, I hope, this may be the most successful response to the requirement for modulations that I've seen since we passed not only this, but the downtown specific plan 4 years earlier. Very much appreciate that it has not come out in the unfortunate formulaic way that so many projects have. And as I read in the staff report, and also heard somewhat in your presentation, that there has been a little bit of push-pull, and you've been working on this. to make it aesthetically successful as well as conforming, without, I hope, losing any friends. I would like to encourage that staff continue to work to accept your interpretation of the modulations, because the intent of breaking up the masses, that as far as I can tell, you are very successful at, and therefore the literal requirements would serve well to be loosened. And if City Council needs to loosen the strings on these, I'd be happy to help get that on an agenda. And I guess that's
Thank
it.
you, Commissioner.
Okay, thank you. A couple thoughts. Thanks for bringing the project back as you have. I think the project does well from a modulation standpoint, fenestration, articulation. I like the materials. I very much like the view from Independence and Constitution and how it starts there and goes up. I think that works well. I think it's a nicely designed project, and I think you've had to figure out how to build this without going below grade on parking and all the attendant issues with that. So from that standpoint, I like the project. I think it's many aspects of it are well done. I have a question for staff, and I want to get back to a couple questions about inclusionary. So question, Katie, when we talk about bonus, I'm never quite clear where we left it in terms of if a project is in RMU bonus, going into bonus, and it's a 0.45 FAR, and they go to X, and it's the 50% formula of the GFA, the incremental value. For a residential project, is it definitive as to whether that incremental value, that 50% incremental value, comes back as a community amenity? Or why are we still talking about that 50% value coming back as potential BMR units? I thought that we had that discussion. That wasn't how it was decided. Or is that now, door number one is the community, is the money associated with going into bonus comes back as something else, or it comes back as units, or it comes back as some mix? What's the current status of that discussion?
Yeah, so I can try to respond to that. So for the bonus level project, we do an appraisal to determine how much value the bonus part of the project is adding to the total project, and then 50% of that is what they have to provide as a community benefit. So BMR units are one way that they could accomplish that. So they could add additional BMR units to the project to cover that public benefit.
So that's the way to use that money. So say it's worth $10, and the allocation per unit is $2 per BMR unit. They could pay down their community amenity responsibility by using whatever values are assigned to BMR units and pay it down that way and put it in their own project. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. So thank you for that. So when I think about inclusionary, because we're having these discussions about 15 and 20, and then you had noted earlier that it's tied together. Community amenities is tied together with this. If you have to pay X dollars because you're going into bonus and it's part of the formula and it's $10, how does that, so that $10 you could spend on a new fire truck for Belhaven, or you could spend it on X units within your project. that discussion would seem to me to be siloed in a different discussion than the economics around jumping from 15 to 20. So tell me how they're tethered together.
They both impact the ultimate financials of this project. So they interact together, just like how added fees or changes in the code impact the ultimate financials of this project. And so if you move one, it's like whack-a-mole. Depending on what the size of one is, it impacts what our ability is on the other.
But let me push on that. Because the formula is structured in such a way that 50% of the appraised value of the incremental GFA, there's a number associated with that, right?
Not yet.
Well, there will be.
Yes.
Right. So I'm running through the thought experiment, running through the process. So you've
Yes.
got building X, you've got X amount of feet that's added, it gets appraised, 50% of that is $10.
Yes.
So as an applicant, you have, in this pile right here, a $10, you have to pay $10. This is a $10 responsibility you have.
Sure.
So that's not going to be mitigated in any way. That is a $10 responsibility. Then over here, you have an inclusionary requirement of 15%. Now, a jump from 15% to 20 is an incremental cost to your
Yes,
project,
right.
but it's bifurcated. It is a different discussion than you've got a static amount that you owe related to going into bonus, and then you've got your inclusionary piece over here. So one doesn't bleed into the other. Your financials just get worse when you go from 15 to 20%. But these are two different buckets. This is a mandatory bucket, and this is mandatory up to 15%, discretionary from 15 to 20%. So my question is, I don't know that they're linked in the way that you had offered a moment ago. It is an economics question. It is a what will the project bear question. It is, it's a political decision. It is an economics decision. It's a multiple layers of decision.
Yep.
So assuming that you agree with the premise that I just laid out, what goes into your thinking of 15 to 20, and were you to go to 20, where do you pass those costs on to? Is it a cost that you've got a rate of return associated with the project and you just get skinnier on the project? Or does that number get fed back into the project and the rent for non-BMR units goes up? Educate me on where the seepage goes for that, the economic incremental amount that were you to jump from 15 to whatever. How does that get spread across the project?
Our ability to kind of complete this project is dependent on the financials, and so they play a key role in our ability to present something to the commission, and it's a full picture. I have trouble I really have trouble decoupling them because that rate of return it's not up to me. It's driven by a market, just like the rent for these market rate units is driven by the market. We may try to set them at something, but if there are units down the street that are renting for something less and are substantially similar, we're not going to get the residents. So in my mind, I can't decouple them because I'm held to a certain standard relative to what's feasible.
I get that, and just at the risk of being redundant, you've got a mandatory payment here for going into bonus. You've got a mandatory 15% exclusionary. Those are must-pay. It's like a must-pay debt, right? And then you've got incremental should you bump up, like just if you decide to do certain fixturization or certain whatever you do on the project, if you bump from 15 to 20, there's going to be that piece in there that cost has to go somewhere.
But we don't know what that mandatory 50% is yet. And so we can't peg it to something so that there's like one remaining assumption that can be changed.
Okay.
For example.
My intent in the question was to try to understand a little bit more about the economics, because we get into these community discussions, and we've got requirements associated with building, the impact fees, and the going into bonus and inclusionary. And then when we get in discussions about what if we go to 15 to 20, what if we have 30% of these which are at 80 to 100% AMI. So these discussions happen, and the better it is as a developer that you're able to articulate what that does, why it may be possible, why it may not be possible. I get that out here you don't know the number. My guess is you run a pro forma. My guess is you understand construction values and what this project might come back at as an appraised value. So there are calculations that you're running. At some point, it's helpful to the community to understand how these costs get spread and where they might go and what the impact of it is, so that the community can better understand the decision making behind it, because transparency is super important in the process.
Totally fair. My goal is to present as many options to the community and to get feedback based on those options. And one of the levers will hopefully be various BMR assumptions.
Got it. Thank you. Quick comment on the commercial space. I guess I don't know why we're talking about it. I mean, I see that there's a pin in it and there's a space being held for it. When it bleeds into becoming a tenant amenity, then I think it stops becoming a community amenity and becomes more of a tenant amenity, and that becomes, incumbent upon you as a developer to put in there whatever you think your tenants around there are going to want, whether it's a coffee shop or whether. I don't want that to be conflated with a community amenity, which may have a real direct impact on the community, and the community wants more than coming down to this space for our coffee. So I think they're two different things, but I appreciate you're holding that pin in there as it relates to that space, but I don't know that that's going to work out to be a community amenity if it's not programmed in a way that isn't another Starbucks for the people upstairs in the office type of thing.
Okay.
It is a bummer that we're building 2 floors of parking for 1 floor of office. I did the numbers as you were talking, trying to figure out if you went down to 2 cars per 1,000, and then you divided that by the 26,000 square feet, and then you came up with X spaces, and there's only 43 spaces on the first floor. Just, at the backdrop of listening to our friends at Bohannon talk about how they build that parking garage, and it's underparked, it's not underutilized, and I would, these buildings cost a lot of money, and I sure hate to see 2 out of 3 stories devoted to parking automobiles. But if you're going to do 2 per 1,000, I don't know how we get around that.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. And look, I might be giving away too much here, but I think that to give the community the ability to come here, car for some people is really the only way for them to get around. And so maybe part of this office parking could be shared on weekends when there isn't a huge influx of office workers with the Belhaven community, for example. Mm-hmm. But I think that flexibility is something we could work on with staff and you all to incorporate.
For cross parking sharing agreement type of thing. Okay. In question, 2 questions. One is the additional, I think it was 15-ish units that took you to 335 for the total apartment units. What was the math behind getting those additional 15 units under the city-state density? Was it a match affordable to?
Yes.
What was the math behind that?
Yeah, it was something we learned a little bit later in the process, unfortunately, and staff can correct me if I'm wrong, but for every affordable unit that we have on the project, we're entitled to 1 market rate unit.
Right.
Given we had already designed the building and kind of really want to keep the envelope what it is, I love this building as it is, there were only so many units we could add, and that amounted to about 15.
Got it, okay.
Yeah.
But, okay. And in total, you guys have a total of 483 at Menlo Uptown, 335 at Portal, and then your other property
Alon Menlo Park is 146 units.
is 146.
Yeah, that's the completed project.
Okay, so it's fair to say that you, with the exception of Signature, contemplating doing a project at Willow Village, you're the largest residential developer by far in Menlo Park.
I hope we will be, yes, yeah.
Okay. Those are my comments. Commissioner DeCardi.
I just want to pick up on the theme around the parking and transportation. You know, the one way to assure that we'll continue to have cars driving all over the place in that part of town is to continue to build parking for those cars to be in. And yet building parking is actually horrible for just about everything else that we want to accomplish. You don't want to build parking. It becomes a dead trade-off for things like BMR or community benefit that we've been talking about. And so I sure wish that we could explore ways that could be creative about actually working through a trade-off that reduces the parking need so that it actually starts tilting the incentives in the right directions. And this gets back to a point that Commissioner Kennedy had made before, which is similar in my mind, which is when we look at this as project by project, we end up with these situations like we just had with the Bohannon project coming back and saying, oh, we just built all this extra parking. So that project is right next door. So isn't there a way to go have a conversation with them about how much extra parking they have and go grab that parking from them and then come back to us and say, we're going to underpark this because we're going to buy it from them? We've just heard about these same trade-offs within Facebook projects here. It seems to me that as a planning commission, and I understand that we're working within a plan that needs to be amended and we need to do a whole sort of stuff, but we also have the opportunity to work creatively with a developer to do something more dramatic that might be actually more beneficial if we could just find the solution to the parking piece in some way that could work for the community. And it seems to me a shame that we sort of dance around this every time we talk about one of these projects, but we don't actually encourage and try to figure out working some creative solution that might be able to benefit everybody without having this onus on parking, which in the long term is not going to be where people are going to get around, is not going to solve the issue for having people with alternative transportation and means to get around in the city. So it would be great if that would be leadership. And given what you're talking about residents and community space, because I like the project, and I think you've actually solved for the parking in this one parking garage better a lot. But the bottom line is nobody wants to walk in a community where you're going a whole block for somebody's front door. That just doesn't work. And so the scale is still all off, and it's all off, unfortunately, because we've got to mask a whole bunch of parking and then jump people up 2 stories, and that doesn't work either. So there's just a whole lot of reasons why it'd be great to figure out a solution, and if you could grab that one, that would be great.
Happy to have conversations with the Bohannons about that. I think it's an opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, Bohannon they just completed 2 parking garages and 2 office buildings that were under the Menlo Gateway project from 2012. I don't know what the parking ratios are, but if those 2 buildings are fully leased to Facebook, then, and the parking ratios were 2012 parking ratios, which is, 4 Chevy Impalas per, 200 square feet. You're going to have oceans, you're going to have decks of parking in those 2 new completed things. And I did read in the staff report that both those buildings are leased to Facebook. So, It's like, it's bocce ball courts, above ground. So look, if you want to pre-lease, well, this is heresy to say office, but look, if you pre-lease those spaces that are in this office building to Facebook, got under their trip count and converted some of this space to something else, I'd love to see another space of non-parking on this, office building.
We would have to change the zoning. We're allowed a maximum of 25% commercial space, so it would just be a floor lower. I think we've all gotten to this point, but basically what's driving the 2 floors is the minimum amount of parking required for the office requires 2 floors of parking. And so if we're going to have 2 floors of parking, we're taking advantage of all that parking.
Right. Assuming that you're not. So the gymnastics I did was if it's pre-leased to a company that already has a trip cap, and you're under their trip cap, it would make sense then that the requirements for that space, if it's a long-term lease, potentially could be taken away. But but I'll leave it at that.
Okay.
Okay, Commissioner Riggs.
Through the chair, a question for staff.
Yes, please.
So, Katie, on the residential portion, the parking is decoupled from the rent by Menlo Park ordinance, is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. They have to pay for parking separate from the residential units.
All right, so I have a couple of questions for Mr. Marcos then. One would be, do you have a sense, roughly, of what you will charge for the parking spaces?
I can speak to the market rate generally in this area. It ranges between $100 to $150 a parking spot. There are times in the market when one spot is included, depending upon a building's capacity. I think, this particular building has less than 1-to-1 ratio, and so I think we'll have probably oversubscribed on individuals wanting to park their cars. So that would lead to increased price.
Okay. I did a search, albeit 2 or 3 weeks ago, and I couldn't find anything down near 100 in Menlo Park, or for that matter, San Mateo or Redwood City. Started at 150, as I recall. So I'm not sure at what point it becomes discouraging. Of course, that's the city's hope, is that it's discouraging, but we can't speak for Greystar. If the residential had room in it, I was just thinking there might be the option to sign a lease for some parking spaces in the residential building to offload some of the parking in the office building, and that would free up some space. So if we are 25% of FAR, and we're talking, 33,000 roughly square feet. So you have somewhere around, 8,000 square feet that you could potentially have of commercial?
So the commercial space, if I'm catching where you're going correctly, is driven by the total acres multiplied by a 0.25% FAR.
Oh, that's the limitation. Okay, but did that come out 1,600?
It came out to 3,500.
Okay, so
which we're at our maximum commercial space potential.
Right. So I see. So if we expanded use of the garage level, that would only come out of your best funding source.
The garage actually does not contribute to that FAR number.
Right, but if you converted it to to a larger retail space. It would
Right.
only, yes, I follow.
Yes.
A little slow here.
That's right.
All right, thank you.
So looking for any additional commissioner comments? And let me check in with both the applicant and staff. Did you get what you needed this evening, and do you have any additional questions or anything you want additional information on?
No, we definitely got what we needed. We really appreciate all the comments. Please feel free to email us or call me directly if you have any more. We're more than happy to sit down with any of you, as we're doing with the community, to really make this a partnership and make this the best project it can be for both us and the community.
Okay, thank you. Staff?
I think you covered everything, yes.
Did we cover it? Good. Okay, so with that, I will close this last agenda item and then go back to Ms. Sandmeyer for any informational items.
Yes, so I just have an update on the next Planning Commission meeting, so that'll be February 10th. So we have 2 single-family homes scheduled, and then the DA annual review for the 500 El Camino Real Stanford project. And that concludes the updates.
Great, thank you. Anything additional? So with that, I will adjourn tonight's meeting at 10:34 p.m.